Welcome back, warriors, to another sword-swinging showdown that is the worst fighting game. My endless task to crown the very best of the very worst. Last time, we endured a lashing from the tongue of the fat man, and while that mutated menagerie of morons came very close to dethroning the SNES version of Pit Fighter, I think today's contestant has just as good, or perhaps an even better chance to do so. Battle Blaze is a fairly infamous but equally obscure SNES fantasy fighter published by Sammy, developed by ACOM and Electronics Application Limited, and was enjoyed by absolutely no one. Strangely, it ran the gamut from being liked by a few publications while being derided by many others, including Electronic Gaming Monthly, which awarded it a 50% rating, which is rather generous in my view, and is something I'll explain to you in exhaustive detail. But will that be enough for this blatant Conan / Golden Axe / Wizards of the Lost Kingdom clone to lop off the head of Pit Fighter? Well, we won't know for sure until we get it in the ring. Try not to be shocked, but there's not much in the way of an interesting origin story to Battle Blaze, which is suitably appropriate since there's nothing interesting about the game itself. Now, that is something I've said about other contenders in the past, but I really mean it this time. Despite that, I'll still try to make an attempt at it. Sammy didn't have much of a presence in the greater gaming landscape in the early 90s, as most of their early output were either smaller releases or published by someone else. There were, of course, a few highlights, like Vice Project Doom, and yeah, that's it, really. As the 90s wore on, though, they started publishing and developing more and more, with, ironically enough, Battle Blaze. Development-wise, though, it was worked on by two smaller studios, the aforementioned ICOM Corporation and Electronics Application Limited, which really sounded like a dynamic and exciting place to work. Now, neither team had a stellar track record before or after, imagine that, with Electronics Application mostly relegated to small-scale puzzle games, including Puzzle Arena Toshinden for the PlayStation, which says a lot while saying so little. ICOM, however, is a company some of you may recognize as the developer of Fighting Masters on the Genesis, which does say a lot in the context of this very show. Neither studio exists nowadays, and in fact, both closed decades ago. And while, I'm not saying Battle Blaze was the direct cause of said closures, I will definitely say releasing it didn't help either. Now, my earliest experience with Battle Blaze started with the holy grail of Canadian-coded geek entertainment, Video and Arcade Top 10, where I witnessed gormless 10-year-olds being trotted out on stage to compete in this farce of a fantasy fighter for about 15 minutes. Not head-to-head, mind you, but rather in seeing who could get the farthest against the CPU. I remember watching this episode back in the day and thinking, man, this looks really lame, and quickly changed the channel. Months later, I saw Battle Blaze in the rental store, and thanks to the exciting, super ripped, muscular guy with a sword on the cover, I decided to give it a go.
One kid seems to love the Speedo, man.
Upon playing it, it then hit me like a claymore to the dome. Oh god, this is that trash I saw in Video and Arcade Top 10! I then proceeded to return it to the store that same day and rented something else, as one sometimes does. Sadly, those same emotions have now returned to me some 30 years later. I mean, how could they not? Just look at this thing! Oh, speaking of how it looks... I mean, yeah, just look at this thing! While really low-spec shovelware on the Genesis sometimes had this really grainy, desaturated look, among those, I can't think of any other specific games that present worse than Battle Blaze here. I mean, the title screen is okay with some incredibly wavy and or wacky fire effects, but yeah, when you're in a match, prepare your eyes for the strain they'll soon be under. I don't know what it is, but the way the stages and sprites are rendered just feels like I'm taking an eye test. It just lacks the smooth look you usually associate with the SNES. Speaking of the sprites, or specifically the selectable characters, they are a giant bag of absolutely nothing. First off is our main hero, who is inexplicably called Carol, which is one of the worst barbarian names I've ever heard. Then we have Lang, no obvious relation to Dave, RIP, who barely counts as his own character, as he is literally just a palette swap of Carol with almost all the same moves. So based on how petty you may be, and I very much am, this cuts the cast of 6 down to 5, which is getting dangerously close to pit fighter levels. Next up is Schnauzer, a Wolfman guy who is probably the only character with any real sauce, because he can go full-on doggy mode, which grants him an exclusive move. The lone female fighter, Tessia, was fine, but at first glance, she really reminds me of Jeanne d'Arc from World Heroes, so that's something? Adric is our last human, and at least he looks a bit different from the rest, which finally leaves us with our last non-human character, Baraka. Anyway, there is a final boss, which I'll get to in a bit, but first I should explain the 2 available modes, as opting for the Hero, great naming convention there, puts you in a single-player quest where you can only play as Carol, which of course means there's only one generic ending for the entire game. The story is some drivel about a demon lord who possesses each of the other 5 characters. You need to vanquish each one before you take on the Spirit of Halloween monster yourself. I mention this because it's a prelude to one of the more annoying aspects of the game's presentation. Every time you beat a foe, you're treated to an animation of a spooky ghost absolutely crashing out, flying in circles around Carol. Now, the effect is pretty impressive, I'll give it that, but it's just 20 uninterrupted seconds, and there's no way to skip this. Multiply that by 5, and you spend a full minute and a half watching the same thing over and over again. I mean, it might as well be a loading screen. Audio is generic to downright terrible, with music being the generic part, and the effects bring in the terrible. The impact of any hit sounds just really weak, and there's a lack of variety when it comes to everything else, with only 2 different sets of voices spread across the whole cast, amounting to a bunch of just... This makes playing the game even more repetitive because you're just assaulted with the exact same sound effects endlessly. And since there's really no actual voice samples or any sort of announcer, it just wears on you incredibly fast. Some of the stages, I have to say, look okay if you are given more animation than others, but that leads to another problem in the only other mode available, the battle. This is basically just a versus mode and comes with a drawn-out cutscene of some rando declaring who the fighters are and who the eventual winner would wind up being. Something which seems like it would be more appropriate in the quest mode. Regardless, the big problem with this is that for some reason, I guess because they are suddenly taking this tournament shit really seriously, you are always locked to the same arena stage no matter what. That's like playing versus in any modern fighter, but you are both condemned to battling on the training stage for the rest of time. Truly, a fate worse than death. Now, before I do my obvious lead-in to the next title card, I have to come back around to the final boss I mentioned earlier, who, try to be surprised here, is also awfully named. Autark, this Janemba-looking sumbitch right here, at least has one cool move, this teleport punch thing. And upon beating him, the one ending you get is at least semi-satisfying. As you stab him in the belly welly, your sword then spins around for a long time, text appears which glazes Carol, and then you are given the full fighter roll call. out of all the "there's only one ending you can get" games I've covered on this show, this ending has to be one of the better examples. But do you know what part of the game is absolutely not better than the others? I've said this before about certain games, and I'll say it again here. Battle Blaze is a game that truly lacks any meaningful mechanics. You have one attack button, one jump button, a few special moves, throws, and thus concludes the mechanics section. You can't dash, there's no combos, fatalities, supers, interactable stages, there's literally nothing here. I mean, Power Moves is as boring of a game as you can imagine, but it at least had the ability to boost your character's stats, and you can navigate the 3D stages a bit, but Battle Blaze doesn't offer anything of its own at all, not even the slightest wrinkle to the fighting game formula. In fact, it's more stripped down and simple than several games that came before it, as again, it only has one attack button, and unlike Power Moves, which uses the up and down directions to dodge attacks, the D-pad is almost worthless here. You sometimes have to use it for a few special moves, but beyond that, it remains unpressed for the entirety of the match. On the topic of special moves, every character has 4, and if you have to drag this out of me, a few of them are half decent. Schnauzer uses electric attacks with his claws and can go into his doggy-style install. Baraka, or whoever, can extend his mace with a chain, and Adric has good reach with his sword specials. Now, the jump button is obviously used for what else but exclusively jumping, which is something I would be saying to you if this game wasn't made by a gang of raving madmen. See, in almost every instance, pressing jump does indeed only do that. But if you crouch and press jump, guess what you do? Jumping? No. Running? No. Backdashing? No. You press jump to attack low. I don't know what the thought process was here. I'm literally at a loss for words, but name me another game where the jump button performs a raw attack. Absolutely unhinged stuff, and I don't know where the guy who made this decision is today, but I can only hope and pray he's in hell. Seriously though, moving on, I would have been curious to have at least been able to try out Janemba, but there's absolutely no codes used to access him. In fact, there's no codes at all, and in fact, even more, there's no options mode either. So if you'd like to tweak round numbers, the timer, music levels, or difficulty, you've got another thing coming. Again, who designs a video game without basic options? Just... Anyway, where was I? You know what? Hold on a sec. Let me see something real quick. Okay. I should have double-checked my work because Battle Blaze does have a cheat. The cheat is to unlock the basic options screen. Yeah, instead of pressing something like start like it says on the main menu, hold select and then press start. You can change the CPU level, the rounds to win, and yes, even the audio levels. Why the blue Battle Blazes is this hidden? You couldn't have just made it selectable next to the 2 other modes. Like that was just impossible, yeah? I could just imagine one of the programmers putting this into the game, putting it into Battle Blaze, just going, yeah, you hold select then press start. You get it, Chief? Furthermore, if you had the instruction manual, guess what? It actually tells you about this, like it was some kind of feature. But if you were without internet and rented this from the store like I did, and it didn't come with the manual like mine didn't, you never would have known. This actually makes me angrier than if there wasn't an options mode at all, because at least Pit Fighter SNES stood on business. They knew that laziness was going to piss people off, and they adhered to that vision. But here, it's like they're teasing you, purposefully programming a weird trick to access something every game, or at least every game, has by default. It's just really befuddling that Battle Blaze is so damn basic from pretty much every aspect, particularly the mechanics, considering that ICOM's previous game, Fighting Masters, while obviously not Third Strike, at least had more going for it, like an insane roster, wall bounces, juggles, and tons of throw moves. With all that said though, I honestly have even less to say about the how Battle Blaze handles its speed, its controls, how the characters animate, everything is shockingly serviceable. Yeah, I can't believe it either. Things aren't too slow or unresponsive, nor too fast and choppy, so the moment-to-moment fighting is easy to keep track of. Hitboxes seem to be pretty standard and solid for the most part, but then again, when there's so few normal attacks and actual mechanics, I guess there wasn't much to screw up to begin with. There are some specials that actually do seem to be a bit too fast and almost unreactable, which includes most projectiles, and especially this mid-air spin kick courtesy of crusty old Carol. Jumping is also way more vertical than it should be, lacking a lot of horizontal momentum, so you have to jump quite a bit to gain any sort of ground, especially considering there's no dashing. But beyond that, there's nothing else I really feel was too egregious here. I mean, of all the things Battle Blaze does very, very wrong, how it feels and controls isn't one of them. But these lack of problems with the controls is more than made up for by how extraordinarily boring it is to play. But where exactly does that leave us in our tournament of terribleness? Well, let's find out. Now, when it comes to video games, I've always said a 1 or 2 is way more preferable than a 4 or 5, as the latter usually denotes a sad, sleep-inducing experience where there's literally nothing to say, and Battle Blaze clearly falls into this second camp. You can kind of laugh and rub your eyes in sheer unadulterated incredulity at how badly SNES Pit Fighter looks and plays. But with Battle Blaze, it feels like it barely exists, fades into the background, is generally hard to perceive because it's such a sink of gray dishwater, which, in my humble opinion, is way worse. But I can't lie, in terms of how it actually feels to control, coupled with the decent selection of special moves and the 5 characters, that does give it a slight edge over Pit Fighter in the quality department. So, sorry Carol and the rest of your very, very poorly named crew, while you made a close battle of it, your one-button gameplay and lack of mechanics land you in our newly created Dregs tier.
The hell's a drag?
Because there's no way I can put you shoulder to shoulder with stuff like Dragon Ball or Violence Fight. And now that the battle has truly blazed out, this is another climactic chapter of the worst fighting game done and dusted. If for some reason you recall playing Battle Blaze from your younger, more innocent days and remember it fondly, I strongly urge you to not. Anyway, if you'd like to suggest some strong, strapping, and sucky fighters to hoist into our ring, let me know in the comments below or over in the fighting temples of my social media. And until then, Battle Blazers, I'll see you next time on the worst fighting game. Oh, hey there, if you enjoyed this wacky madcap episode of The Worst Fighting Game, what better way to celebrate the mayhem than procuring the official Matt McMuscles plushie? He's squishy, he's bitchy, and he comes in at an astonishingly generous and overly complimentary 9 inches long. Head on over to youtooz.com right now to add him to your collection within the next 12 days before he's gone forever. And once he's locked inside your home, feel free to give him an elbow drop, power bomb, or set him up for tea time, or even weirder things. No judgment here! Link in the description and pinned comment below. He is literally guaranteed to improve the quality of your life. Not a guarantee.